Are you stuck in the same old routine at work? Do you find yourself hitting a creative wall, unable to see beyond your current perspective? It's time to break free and unlock the power of fresh perspectives. I am David Gouthro. This is Discover Fresh Perspectives. It's a good thing there's no editing because I might have cut that out, but it still is Discover Fresh Perspectives, and I'm here today with Cam Stockdale. Welcome, Cam.
Well, I really appreciate the invitation. And don't worry about the intro getting messed up. I've done a few of these in the past, and those rehearsed lines are always the ones that I mess up too.
Oh, totally. I had one the other day that I mispronounced the person's name like 3 times, and the harder I tried to get it right, the more I messed it up till finally I just put a card in front of me and did it phonetically and didn't even try to pronounce the person's name. I just read the different pieces on it. But Cam Stockdale, I can handle. I just can't say Discover Fresh Perspectives because I've only done it about 100 times. So, Cam, when we first started connecting today, I thought it might be interesting to talk about your perspective on leadership, kind of a different approach or a spin on that. So maybe you could tell me a little bit what that's about and how you came to that as a focus for your work or your passion.
Sure. It's kind of a circuitous route to get here at the end of the day. But I have a sort of an academic background in leadership, and so I do a lot of research in this area and taken a lot of courses. And in my previous role as a CEO, we'd been working with the Future Skills Center, and it's an area that we really worked in. What are the skills of the future? What do people need? What is technology, and how is it changing people? And we're always chasing after things like communication or emotional intelligence or some of those kind of things. And while you can improve emotional intelligence, I think a lot of the things that we're changing or wanting to change, it's, we're taking a course, we're trying to develop skill sets. And, and I actually think that's a wrong approach. I think the term like soft skills, we should really throw it out, because I don't think that we're chasing training all the time. I think that the way that we are successful is by leveraging what you're inherently good at. I think I use the example of, like, I should never be an accountant, right? I'm not a mathematician. I'm not great with numbers. So why would I pursue that as a path to success? And the way that I really started thinking about this, I was very fortunate to take a course with Professor Myra White at one time. And she did interviews with uber successful people at one time. The Richard Bransons and the Oprah Winfreys of the world. And what she really found was they leveraged these little micro talents, little things that they didn't even really know that they knew how to do. Oprah sitting in front of a TV camera and giving the news got her fired. But Oprah with a microphone to get emotional responses out of people became a billionaire. So it's these micro talents that I think we should be leveraging for our future and how we sort of lead people. And that's how I kind of got into it.
So how does one find out what their micro talents are? I mean, use the example of Oprah, and it wasn't maybe looking for, what the micro talent is going to make her go big, but somehow it came up, and then she was able to leverage that. So how do we find out what our micro talents are? How do we find out if we have any micro talents?
Yeah. It's a really good question. It's the secret sauce. And I think what Myra White found in her research is that people really kind of fell into it. A lot of people really didn't sort of sit down and do an exercise and come up with, oh, this is the answer. They stumbled across it. But I've done some work on it and sort of my research area, and I'm stealing a little bit from what she certainly did and other researchers. And here's a real easy way of doing it. And that is, think of 3 times in your life when you have been really successful. So take a moment. What were you doing? And you write it down. You literally write down 500 to 1,000 words in great detail. So I remember doing this exercise myself. I was a paramedic at one point in time, and I was leading the Stanley Cup riots happened in Vancouver, and I was the sort of on-site commander. And I think that for all intents and purposes, we did an amazing job, and so did the staff around me. So I used that as an example, and I wrote all of this down. And then what you go through is you go through what you've written and you highlight things and you look for patterns. So I remember thinking, oh, well, it was sunny. I remember the smell in the air. I remember the expression on people's faces. And you write it in that detail. And if you, in these three successful sort of episodes, you keep sort of realizing that you write down the facial expressions on people,
Hmm.
where's your secret skill? There's something to think about leveraging in what you do. That's sort of a micro skill. And you may not even realize that that's something that you inherently do better than anybody else. Now, I'm not saying you have to recognize facial expressions in
Mhm.
people, it could be anything. Um, but that's an easy exercise to get you started going down this road.
So now you just sort of mentioned that you've been a paramedic at a
Yeah.
time that many of us here in Vancouver remember. It doesn't appear that you're doing that now. So could you maybe give us a sense of, just so we have a context to listen into our comments about, how from there did you get to where you are now, and where are you now?
Again, that's that windy path. Yeah,
Mhm.
so I was a paramedic for about 25 years, and I was getting promoted up the ranks of the organization. And I thought, if I'm going to be a senior manager in the organization, I should probably go back and go to school and really learn how to lead people properly. So I did a master's degree at the University of Guelph. I finished
Okay.
that, and I thought, it wasn't so bad. I kind of liked that, right? It wasn't like high school where I hated every minute of it, right? Because I was studying stuff that was really relevant to me at the time.
Mhm.
So I actually went back to school again and did a doctoral degree in interdisciplinary leadership. Um, so then I really got my full kind of nerd hat on. I went back to school again. Went to Harvard off and on for a year. Did post grad work in organizational behavior.
Mhm.
Yeah, through that whole process, I ended up getting a couple of jobs, executive director of a nonprofit, a director in a larger nonprofit. And then from there, I actually went to be the CEO of the Work Wellness Institute, which is a
Oh,
nonprofit research institute based here in Vancouver. And we looked at workplace occupational health and wellness issues. So things like, does the 4-day work week actually work? What do you do in a hybrid work environment? Those are the kind of research topics. And a lot of the stuff I've been doing recently is on the gig economy
mm.
and the research into the gig economy and the effect that has on people. And I was signing all kinds of contracts. And, I think every organization's a tech organization these days. So again, I went back to school and did a law degree in technology and innovation. So yeah, a very odd route, but I kind of call myself this really academic nerd type of person now with a little bit of experience in the background.
Well, you certainly don't look 95. I was just doing a quick little calculation there. So, what of your research that you're doing now is would you describe as leading as or most interesting to you, and that perhaps should be interesting to some of our listeners?
Most recent research project that I finished was on psychological safety of rideshare drivers. Like
Sorry. Oh,
rideshare drivers, like
huh.
um, Uber drivers and Lyft drivers.
Hmm.
So I looked specifically at those individuals who were doing it, I'll say, as a side job to make ends meet, right? Rent's expensive. How do I make more money? Let's go, deliver food or be an Uber driver. And I was looking at the psychological impact of that work on them. And maybe you can generalize a little bit to the larger gig economy as a whole in the way that functions. But what it really said to me was that it is a difficult the platforms that they use, the type of work that they're doing, the pressures that they're under certainly challenge them from a psychological safety perspective. And there's some mental health concerns that go along with it. You hear stories about people saying, I'm working a full shift and then I'm going to go be an Uber driver, and I'm so tired that I'm sleeping in the back seat of my car until I get a call. Those kinds of stories are the things that sort of come out in that research.
So I'm curious the term psychological safety. A friend of mine is Amy Edmondson, who did a lot of work in the
Yeah.
area psychological safety. And I'm just trying to picture. I can see the stress and mental health aspect of it. I'm curious about the intersection with psychological safety.
Yeah.
How does that work?
They're in this really weird perspective. Are they an employee or aren't they an employee? I mean, there's a legal complicated story around that. But, there's a lot of animosity towards the platform themselves, the companies themselves and the way that they're treated and the way that they're managed. On one hand, they feel like they take too much money from them. On the other hand, the algorithms that are used, they feel are unfair at times, the pricing
Mm,
structures.
mhm.
So, I can understand how, when you think in a subcontractor role, that psychological safety is a bit of a gray zone. But in this particular context, when you look at it, um, they're almost like more like employees, and the way that they're treated by the organization
Right. Okay.
is where the problem lies. So,
Gotcha. So, well, now I'm curious, how did that sort of rise up as an area that you wanted to investigate? Like, I'm trying to think of all the different things out there in the world where you could apply some of your background. How did that one surface?
um, I did a couple of other research projects with the staff. So I just retired from the Work Wellness Institute in March. But some of the research projects that we had done there were in the gig and on the gig economy, specifically looking at those with disabilities who are working in the gig economy. It's typically, I'm not going to say typically, that's kind of the wrong word, but it is rather than dealing with larger organizations or employers with things like accommodations and the complexity of that, there's this alternate route for people with disabilities to go and work, and that's in the gig economy.
Mhm.
And so we did a research project that really got a lot of interest around the world. I mean, I spoke in Australia on the topic. I think I spoke back east in Ottawa on the topic, and then Tokyo on the topic. So it really resonated, this research. And what it really had to say was, I think there was a lot of organizations that kind of listened and perked their ears up about the gig economy, especially with people with disabilities
Mhm.
and the impact that that was having. And it just led into this next research project. So,
Okay. Okay. I was just thinking when you say gig economy, I think I don't know why I thought about this. But if it was what if it's like a gag economy and what that would be? And I thought 2 different ways to look at that. One would be the gag
yeah.
economy, like, "Yeah, I got I feel terrible that I have to do this to make money." But there's also the gag economy, it's a little bit different where people are afraid to say something because they might lose their job. Like, I look at what's happening in the States. Speaking out and speaking up, not a really good thing to do from a longevity standpoint. Just, thinking about that.
Well, I have some good friends who are academics down in the States. Uh, One individual is a fairly high profile in the sort of the health community.
Mhm.
Has written some papers that have been widely accepted as kind of the be all end all of the particular topic. And there are, I speak with him on a regular basis, and they're all afraid. They're literally afraid of putting their hand up,
Mhm.
because they're going to lose their job. And they've all lost their research funding at this
Oh,
point.
yeah.
It's all been stopped. And so, how do you take a 20-year cancer study and all of a sudden put it on hold so that 20 years worth of research is thrown out? So he is almost in this position of like counseling his peer group around this. Um, and interestingly enough, I have another counterpart who is in Chicago, but uh, has a bit of an inside track to the Democratic Party in the
Mm.
state. So when I've had a conversation with him, he says the Democratic Party's in a bit of a mess themselves. So I think that there's a whole environment down there that's just it's shifting.
Well, and so let me take this to bring us back maybe to leadership and what's required to move through these things. So I'll ask a bit of a different question. What are some of the the myths or beliefs that people have about leadership that they're hanging on to that may in fact be getting in the way of developing the kind of leadership that we need for the future?
I think the biggest one is the idea of authority over influence.
Hmm.
Right? From my perspective, leadership is the ability to influence people. It's not your authority, right? Just because I have the title of CEO, uh, you can have somebody just as influential in the organization who doesn't hold the title.
Hmm.
I know in my own research that I did for, the doctoral degree, I really looked at change within the healthcare system. So change management was kind of the topic. And I wanted to do it in a unionized environment because I wanted that sort of unionized side of things. How do you actually create change that's going to stick in a healthcare environment? I did it here in BC. And what was really evident was that leaders themselves, uh, you have to address the human factors all the time. It's that influence that you have. And just because you have that title, and it really showed up in healthcare, that you have to recognize that
Hmm.
that you know, I had said you can have a leader who has led a change initiative in an organization before, and if they has been perceived to have gone poorly or failed, you better get them out of there because they're not trusted anymore to lead that change. They're not trusted to look out for staff because they're stepping into the unknown. And change is all about the ability to say to somebody, uh, take that blind step with me. This is where we're
Hmm.
going, right? This is the vision I'm going to paint on the wall. Come with me. And if they failed in that before, you can't put them back because you're going to have somebody that doesn't have the title that has the ability to influence, who's going to perceive it negatively and communicate negatively about it. And your change initiative is going to be a problem because of it. So to go back to your original question, I think it's this idea of influence over authority, and people can have a lot of influence with them.
Hmm. Well, uh, something that occurred to me is that influence can translate from one environment or one context to another. Authority, from my perspective, usually is context dependent. So I can have a lot of authority at work. When I go home, that authority is worth nothing, right? It does not translate. So, how do we figure out what it is that we carry with us wherever we go that's going to allow us to lead? I remember you talk about healthcare. I remember quite a few years ago working with one healthcare group that really wanted everyone to think of themselves as being leaders. So they changed everyone's title to something, this leader, that leader, and it failed totally because people didn't feel like leaders. They didn't get treated like leaders. They didn't know what that actually meant. So, the authority that was going to be granted to them by virtue of their title was not there at all. There was no influence that came along with that. It
Yeah.
was astounding.
I took another course one time and I picked up on what I learned in this course. And it's the dirty side of leadership, right?
Mm,
And really this is about how do you get people to put the crown on your head at the end of the day?
mm,
And I know that that term is probably offensive to some people, like leaders shouldn't have a crown. But how do you get to be seen as a leader?
mm.
And really understanding what the coin of the realm really is, what's important in organizations, and you really need to understand that. Then you need to understand how you position yourself to be seen as a leader, and that's the dirty side of it, right? You can't be seen as like being a lot smarter. You have to be seen as just slightly smarter than everybody else, just a little bit. And those are the kind of things that, get you the ability to influence. And then we see it, and we talked about the United States, that idea of being able to create that us versus them environment, and then your suggestions and the things that you can say because they're the enemy just become that much more acceptable. So, from a leadership perspective and the ability to gain influence, I think that there is sort of a researchy academic sort of steps that you can go through to be seen as a leader, but they're not always nice and they're not always what you want in the workplace, right?
Very interesting. So, if you were coaching someone today how to be a better leader, how would that coaching or the content be different from, let's say, 10 years ago? So now you have someone in front of you that wants to become a better leader. What are you suggesting? What are you working with them about? And how has that changed from a lot of the courses that were around years ago?
Well, this is the area that sort of sticks in my craw a little bit because I think, what I see out there with regard to leadership development and leader coaching, and this is no different from anywhere else. And what you have is people who may take a 2 or 3 week course and then claim to be an expert, right? Because there's money to be made, and so people step into the space, and they I'm hopeful that what we start to see is that we start recognizing what credentials really mean, and what an expert is in the field. I think it's odd in some respects that I think the people that are true experts really define what they're experts in, right? I have a friend who is a very much an expert in leadership, and she'll say, listen, like I can talk to you about this, but I don't know enough. I'm not comfortable enough to like say that I'm going to coach you in all things. Versus I think that person with the 2 week course says, "Oh, I can do it all, right? I'm an organizational behavior and a leadership expert and etc." So that's the first thing that I hope is shifting a little bit. And I don't know if it is. Um, if I'm coaching somebody, I really get away from all the academic theories, right? I
Mm,
get away from
mm,
like, you don't need to know what transformational leadership is or servant leadership or all of these theories. I want you to know what the behaviors are that make you successful at the end of the day. Like transformational leadership or transactional leadership, it means something and they have attached behaviors to it. What are those behaviors? So those you need a bit of a self-assessment. You need a bit of, and I look at the micro skills thing. I have
mm,
I
mm.
use for micro skills. Let's uncover what you're really good at. And if you're really good at communicating with people, great. Then that's the thing that you do as the leader in the organization. And if you're not good at it, then you better find somebody to communicate for yourself, or like recognize what you're good at and not, yeah, and what you're not good at. So I think it's a little bit of self-discovery. I don't necessarily like all the psychometric assessments, right? I think they're often not grounded in actual research. So I typically don't use anything like that. It's more around let's have a conversation and let's discuss what you're good at, and get rid of that theoretical stuff that puts people to sleep to start with.
Yeah, I share, a lot of that, I've seen so many different programs that put people in a box, this, that, and the other thing. The value to me is to get people to have a conversation they wouldn't have had otherwise and to be more mindful, in the decisions they made. So, these days there's such a big focus on micro skills and credentialing in important, in particular, where you get your certificate for this and it gets put up on LinkedIn and yeah, you got this and the bells and all that kind of stuff. So, with respect to developing leaders, what's your view on the value or disservice that's caused by the focus on credentialing these days?
I think what happens is, you have an organization and you want to go out and do leadership development for your staff, right? You have the best of intentions and you spend a bunch of money on it,
Hmm.
but your return on investment is terrible.
Hmm.
I think that's the biggest problem. You say that the company spent, and I'm just going to use an arbitrary figure on a large
Hmm.
number. Let's say you spend $100,000, and at the end of the day, you don't see any return for that investment. No improvement in performance. No, your production doesn't increase. Uh, so, are you likely to go out and find leadership coaches or leadership development or other stuff again? You're not because you feel like you burned $100,000.
Hmm.
And this spills over into a lot of the work that I was doing, as the CEO of the Work Wellness Institute. And that was, looking at how to create high performing cultures in organizations. And a lot of what's out there doesn't work. Like the research says it doesn't fundamentally work. And so when I stand on a stage and I talk to people and I say, listen, you're here listening to me. You're the sold people on this, right? Like you understand, you see value in it, but you're burning your money. So this is what works. This is what doesn't work. And I think that credentialing issue, it muddies those waters. It's very hard for people to understand what does, who's an expert, who's not. That's, I think, where the biggest problem lies.
Yeah, boy. Well, so now you mentioned that you retired from that your last organization. You don't look or sound like someone who's going to be putting themselves on a shelf for very long. So what's at your learning edge, or what are you curious about now that you want to spend more thought time and perhaps some more research time about? Because you look like you have a lot of good learning ahead of you there, Cam.
Uh, well, you remember when you said, you have lots of authority at work, but when you go home, you have no authority? I think when I was discussing this idea of retirement, very much learned at home who the authority was. Yeah, I was told, no, you're not used to sort of taking it easy, and and you would drive me crazy if you were around the house. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that I have on my plate. I sit on a number of boards and executive committees and those kind of things. I'll continue to do a lot of that type of work. Everybody laughs at me when I say this. I think that I'm going to go back to school potentially and do another PhD. So there's a lot of things there, but for me, I'm sort of getting into that sort of consulting space, that coaching space, because I think there's some experience that I have. Along with the academic background, that I could put those two together and maybe be a little bit different. But there's a learning piece there, right? Like I'm not I don't consider myself a coaching expert.
Mhm.
So, there's stuff I have to learn there as well. And that's my leading edge, I think, these days.
So, using that term leading and the fact that we start off talking about leadership, if there were some folks out there that were wondering what they might do to develop their own leadership, regardless of what their formal role is, do you have one or two suggestions on things that people might think about if they wanted to develop their ability to lead with influence rather than authority?
I would start with that micro skills approach. Really, you can do
Okay.
that by yourself. Sit down, write out whenever you've been successful in your life, and it can be almost anything, right?
Mhm.
The more you do of this, the more you have that reflective practice and do that assessment. I think it gives you the opportunity to understand you as a leader and what you could potentially leverage to be that sort of person of influence in your organization or wherever else you might want to be a leader. And then you sit down and you can really go through and think about what's important within my organization.
Mhm.
I always use the example of if you look at an organization and the accounting side of the organization is massive as compared to the HR side, who has more power and authority? And if you want to move up the food chain in that organization, where do you go? Where do you try to get a job?
Interesting.
Right? It's on that, large, bulky organization because the person that's leading that, the C-suite person, has usually had the ability to they have the power in the organization. Um, so I think there's a lot of sort of self-reflection and of your environment, of yourself, and then looking at your environment and making a path for yourself of where do you want to go and how do you get there. Uh, Somebody said to me one time, I'm really upset. They gave me an office by the bathroom, right? And that just told me everything and I said, whoa, 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 hang on a second. I said, if you look at the research, the person who sits in the office closest to the bathroom is like the person that gets promoted, right? It's because everybody goes there during the day and shares information with you. And
Interesting.
so stay there, get information, and you become the go-to person and you're the one that gets promoted. And I saw this person 3 years later and she said, "You changed my life," right? Thought I was disrespected. I thought I was being told what I was worth. And instead, I've been promoted twice and I've kept my same office because of what you said. So yeah, look at that. Look at yourself. What are you good at? What are you inherently going to be better than anybody else? It's a skill that's kind of hidden behind the scenes. And then really sit down and look at your environment. And if I can sort of plug somebody else's book here, Jeffrey Pfeiffer, a professor at Stanford, has a book, Power, I think it's called. I think it's a great book. I think it sort of lays out and articulates how you kind of look at that environment from that perspective on like how to gain power and influence and become a leader.
I'm going to, my assumption when you talk about that is look at those three areas where we're really successful. It's not just in a business. It could be any context. That could be as a coach, could be as a family member, but something where you really excelled and felt good about it. Just so there may be people listening out there that aren't in an organization, don't want to be in an organization, but would like to develop more influence. And the same technique that you described could be used virtually anywhere. Is that fair?
Oh yeah. In fact, one of mine was I was a ski racer at one point in time in my life. Not very good, but I had one or two particular runs where like there's no way I should have got that time. I wasn't that skilled. And so I really sat down and did some analysis on what was it that actually got me there. And that was one of mine. Uh, so yeah, you can apply this to your personal life. You can apply this to your professional life. And I think that's a very valid point that you bring up.
Very cool. Good advice to leave folks with. So, Cam, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and having our conversation. I appreciate you taking the time to be with me here today.
Well, I certainly appreciated the invitation, and this was great. Thank you.
So, this has been David Gouthro with Discover Fresh Perspectives. Come on back next week and let's hear some more. Subscribe now because on Fresh Perspectives, every episode is an opportunity to explore new horizons and redefine what's achievable.